Germany did not fear America at the start of the war. This was one of the greatest strategic miscalculations in military history, and one that would cost the Third Reich everything. From Berlin's perspective, the United States was not a warrior nation. It was a country overflowing with wealth, entertainment, consumer comfort, freedom of expression, and political argument. A place where discipline was relaxed, individuality was celebrated, and soldiers were not forged through centuries of tradition. To the German High Command, this painted one image: America was soft.
Welcome to Battle Genesis, where the greatest battles and the most shocking moments in history come alive with cinematic clarity. If you're ready to explore the true events that shaped our world, make sure you join us. Subscribe now and step inside history. This is Battle Genesis.
When German intelligence officers analyzed the characteristics of the average American soldier, they concluded he was too young, too inexperienced, too talkative, too independent, too accustomed to civilian comfort, too democratic in mindset, too reliant on equipment rather than toughness. The German worldview was rigid. Prussian military tradition emphasized obedience, harsh discipline, hierarchy, and collective sacrifice. A strong army, in their minds, could only come from a society raised under strict order. America was the opposite of that. Even Hitler mocked the United States, calling it a nation of mongrels controlled by businessmen. He believed American culture made weakness inevitable. To him and many German officers, Americans lacked the stoic discipline of the German soldier, the historical warrior spirit of the European nations, the hunger and desperation produced by centuries of conflict. Germany misread the American character completely. They saw comfort and assumed fragility. They saw freedom and assumed disorder. They saw diversity and assumed weakness. They believed that America's economic power was impressive, yes, but irrelevant. Wars, they believed, were won by hardened men, iron discipline, and precise planning, not by factories. This thinking infected every strategic decision Germany made. They believed America would join the war slowly. America would struggle to mobilize. American troops would perform poorly in real combat. American commanders would collapse under pressure. American industry would take too long to shift to war production. American morale would break after casualties. Germany believed it had years before America became a real military threat. But this assumption was based on an outdated model of war. The Wehrmacht was built on 19th-century concepts of elite troops and lightning tactics. The U.S. military was about to introduce a 20th-century concept: industrial warfare on a scale never seen in human history. Germany believed America lacked discipline. They never imagined America would compensate with relentless innovation, unlimited industrial capacity, fast-learning soldiers, decentralized leadership, mechanized mobility, technological superiority, and a cultural mindset of reinvention and adaptation. Germany believed America wasn't ready. They didn't realize America was built differently, built for scale, built for acceleration, built for overwhelming force. The reality hit slowly at first, through intelligence reports, production numbers, and intercepted data. But Germany dismissed the warnings. What they did not understand yet was that the United States was not preparing for war in the old world sense. America was preparing to unleash something entirely new. A continent-size industrial giant with the ability to reshape the battlefield at will. This misunderstanding, this fatal arrogance, would haunt Germany every step of the war. And the first signal that something was wrong came not from a battlefield, but from a desk deep within Berlin's intelligence directorate, where analysts discovered something terrifying. The numbers didn't make sense. But that is the beginning, the first crack in Germany's illusion of superiority. The moment before the storm.
The industrial fantasy. Germany's first taste of real shock did not come on the battlefield. It came in the quiet, sterile offices of its intelligence agencies, where men stared at numbers on paper and refused to believe what they saw. These were seasoned analysts, experts in military production and logistics. They had calculated the output of tanks, artillery, aircraft, and ships across Europe for years. They knew what was possible and what was not. And then the reports from America arrived. At first, the numbers seemed like propaganda. Liberty ships, they read, were being launched faster than Germany's most optimistic projections could accommodate. In some cases, ships that traditionally took 6 months to build were being completed in under 2. In one extraordinary instance, the SS Robert E. Peary was constructed from keel laying to launch in 4 days and 15 hours. Germany could not comprehend it. Their industrial minds, trained to calculate output based on centuries of European efficiency, failed. It violated every principle they knew about production, labor, and supply chains. And it wasn't just ships. Airplanes were appearing in numbers that seemed impossible. Ford's Willow Run plant, a single factory stretching for over a mile in Michigan, churned out B-24 Liberator bombers as if they were Model Ts. In a single month, America produced more heavy bombers than Germany could muster in a year. The German analysts ran the numbers again and again. Their blood ran cold. The Americans weren't just building equipment. They were mass-producing armies. Every tank, plane, and truck was part of an industrial assembly line designed to replace losses faster than Germany could destroy them. Even the humble Sherman tank terrified them. German panzer divisions were masterpieces of craftsmanship, precision-built, powerful, and nearly invincible in small numbers. But the Americans treated their tanks as disposable tools. Simple, rugged, replaceable. By war's end, the U.S. would field over 50,000 Sherman tanks, a number that Germany could never hope to match. The Germans were taught that war was an art, fought with skill, courage, and strategy. The Americans treated it as a problem, a massive industrial problem that could be solved by sheer scale, redundancy, and coordination. This realization did not immediately terrify the German command. They still believed in their soldiers' superiority. They still thought quality would beat quantity. They assumed the Americans might overwhelm, but eventually discipline and training would win the day. They were wrong. By early 1943, the first American units arrived in North Africa. At Kasserine Pass, the Germans faced a test: raw, inexperienced Americans against battle-hardened Afrika Korps veterans. The result was initially humiliating for the U.S. Green troops faltered, broke under pressure, and left equipment behind. For the Germans, it seemed to confirm their assumptions. These were not true soldiers. These were shopkeepers with rifles. But the lesson of Kasserine Pass was temporary. Behind the lines, American logistics never stopped. Every lost piece of equipment could be replaced. Every failure was a learning opportunity. American officers studied mistakes, adapted, and returned stronger. Meanwhile, Germany's best soldiers were irreplaceable. Every casualty, every tank lost was permanent. The contrast was invisible at first, subtle,
almost academic, but it was inescapable, and it was growing. The analysts in Berlin began connecting dots. If American production continued at this pace, if American units could be trained and supplied faster than Germany could destroy them, then the war was not a traditional military contest. It was a mechanical, industrial machine grinding toward the Reich. Germany's arrogance that their centuries-old traditions and elite troops could overcome any force was beginning to falter. They had underestimated the scale, the efficiency, and the philosophy of the American war machine. And yet, even then, Germany still had a final comfort: the battlefield. They believed that, in combat, their superiority would win out. They imagined the Americans would crumble under pressure, as the French and Russians had before. But this assumption, too, was about to be shattered. The American difference on the battlefield. The true realization of America's strength did not come from intelligence reports or production numbers. It came on the battlefield, in the dust, the sand, and the mud, where theory met reality. The first major test for American forces in Europe was Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, in early 1943. Here, inexperienced American troops faced seasoned veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, soldiers who had survived the punishing deserts of North Africa and the frozen hell of Stalingrad. The battle was brutal, and at first it seemed Germany was right. American forces broke under pressure. Units scattered, leadership faltered, and tanks and equipment were abandoned in the sand. To the German eye, it was confirmation of what they had long believed. Americans were untested, soft, and incapable of real war. Yet Kasserine Pass also revealed something subtle, something that German officers did not immediately grasp. Despite the initial rout, the Americans did not give up. They retreated in order, regrouped, and absorbed the lessons of failure. The next engagement showed marked improvement, better coordination, improved tactics, and, above all, resilience. The Germans expected the Americans to collapse permanently. Instead, they were learning in real time. This pattern repeated again and again. On the hedgerows of Normandy, in the forests of the Ardennes, and along the beaches of Omaha, the Americans displayed a combination of tactical adaptation and industrial backing that Germany could not anticipate. At Normandy, the first day of D-Day, the landings were chaotic and bloody. German machine guns and artillery tore through American ranks. Casualties were high. Commanders were young, some barely out of civilian life. Yet the Americans continued to push forward. What shocked German observers most was the methodical, almost mechanical application of overwhelming firepower. A single American platoon encountering a German machine gun nest would not simply charge or retreat. Instead, the platoon leader radioed for artillery support. If the machine gun persisted, they escalated, calling in battalion mortars, divisional artillery, airstrikes, and even naval gunfire from ships offshore. Within minutes, a position that could have held a German division was neutralized with a torrent of firepower. To the German eye, this seemed wasteful, even cowardly. The Americans were playing rough, indiscriminate, almost brutal in their efficiency. Yet the results were undeniable. The Americans advanced steadily, losing fewer soldiers than Germany expected, while German units faced attrition without relief. The difference was not courage or skill alone. It was philosophy. Germany had mastered precision, efficiency, and the elite soldier. America mastered redundancy, adaptability, and relentless industrial output. This contrast became glaring during Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy. American forces concentrated massive firepower on narrow sectors of German defense, thousands of guns, hundreds of bombers, obliterating even the most fortified positions. Then, mechanized units under General Patton drove deep into the German rear, cutting supply lines and destroying command centers at speeds that Germany could not comprehend. German counterattacks, executed with skill and precision, failed not because of lack of planning or courage, but because the Americans had solved the problem of attrition. Every division the Germans destroyed could be replaced. Every lost tank could be rebuilt in factories thousands of miles away. Every fallen soldier was replaced by a fresh, trained recruit ready to fight. The Germans had entered the war thinking they faced a human army. By late 1944, they realized they faced something else entirely: a machine. Not a machine in the sense of cold metal and gears alone, but a machine powered by industry, logistics, and relentless national will. Every American unit was a cog in an unstoppable system, capable of grinding down the elite German forces indefinitely. Even the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final gamble, reinforced this reality. When German tanks created a massive bulge in the American lines, they expected panic. They expected collapse. Instead, surrounded units like the 101st Airborne at Bastogne held firm, refusing to surrender. Patton's Third Army, miles away, rerouted with incredible speed, arriving to relieve them. The combination of American mobility, logistics, and determination shattered every German expectation. Letters from captured German soldiers reveal their bitter acknowledgement. The Americans were not just soldiers. They were a system designed to endure, to replenish, and to overcome. By now, the Germans had learned the hard truth. America was built different. It was not just a military force. It was an industrial, mechanical, logistical, and cultural phenomenon, an unstoppable engine of war.
The mechanized beast and Germany's final realization. By late 1944, the cracks in Germany's war machine were no longer cracks. They were fractures spreading across the entire structure. The Wehrmacht, once the most feared force on earth, found itself facing an enemy that did not fight the way they expected. An enemy that did not measure war in elite units or perfect maneuvers, but in tons, gallons, miles, and manpower. An enemy that turned logistics into a weapon more powerful than any tank. This weapon had a name: the mechanized American war engine. Germany had tanks, America had mobility. Germany had elite divisions, America had endless divisions. Germany had experience, America had systematic adaptation. Nothing embodied this more than the Red Ball Express, one of the greatest logistical operations in human history. After the breakout from Normandy, the Allies faced a problem. Their armies were advancing so fast that supplies couldn't keep up. The front line stretched hundreds of miles. Food, gasoline, ammunition, and spare parts ran thin. For most nations, this would halt an offensive. For America, it was a challenge to overcome. Within days, engineers and logisticians created a 24/7 trucking operation, staffed largely by African-American soldiers who drove thousands of GMC trucks across rough roads, under enemy threat, through rain and mud, without rest. These convoys delivered 12,000 tons of supplies every single day, feeding the American war engine as it surged toward Germany's borders. To German officers, watching American columns roll forward in an endless stream of steel and gasoline, the realization was humiliating and terrifying. They were not fighting an army. They were fighting a supply chain powered by an entire continent. German generals wrote bitterly, "Every American division is motorized. Every movement is rapid. We cannot match their mobility." where German units marched on foot or relied on horses because fuel shortages crippled their vehicles. American forces moved in trucks, half-tracks, and jeeps. It was a fully mechanized army, something Germany simply could not replicate. This mobility meant American units appeared where they shouldn't be, hit harder than predicted, and recovered faster than expected. It was as if the battlefield bent to American timing. Even the tanks reflected this philosophy. Germany created masterpieces like the Tiger and Panther, powerful, heavily armored, deadly at long range. But they were fragile, slow, expensive, and fuel-hungry. America produced the M4 Sherman, not the strongest, not the thickest, not the most intimidating, but reliable, easy to repair, and mass-producible. Where Germany could field a handful of super weapons, the Americans fielded thousands. And when a Sherman was destroyed, another was already on the way. Quantity and reliability outweighed elite precision. But technology wasn't the only shock for Germany. It was American air power, a constant, suffocating presence. P-51 Mustangs roamed the skies, cutting down German aircraft. B-17s and B-24s pulverized factories, rail lines, and supply depots. P-47 Thunderbolts shredded convoys and armor. Germany's Luftwaffe, once dominant, faded into memory. By 1945, German soldiers would look at the sky and instinctively flinch, not from rain or snow, but because they knew American aircraft were coming. They had air superiority everywhere. They had the factories to maintain it, and they had the pilots to dominate with it. This was not how Germany envisioned war. Their doctrine relied on powerful, decisive battles, but America delivered constant, grinding pressure day after day, with no pause, no shortage, no exhaustion. As American forces pushed toward the Rhine, Germany threw everything they had into delaying the advance. Volkssturm militias, undertrained boys and elderly men were forced into the line. Elite units like the SS Panzer divisions were shadows of their former selves. Fuel was scarce, ammunition was rationed. Meanwhile, American soldiers rotated, refreshed, re-equipped, and reinforced. Their uniforms were new, their rations were full, their vehicles were maintained with spare parts that Germany only dreamed of. Even simple items like socks, boots, and medical kits shocked German POWs. The average American soldier had better equipment than most German officers. The final realization came during the crossing of the Rhine. Germany believed the river would buy time, that the Americans would be forced into a slow, costly operation. But the Americans crossed with breathtaking speed, using amphibious vehicles, pontoon bridges, and coordinated air-ground assault teams. It wasn't just strength, it was efficiency. A German officer famously remarked, "The Americans fight with mathematics. They calculate everything, supplies, firepower, replacements, and then they crush you with the answer." By the time American forces surrounded the Ruhr, Germany knew the truth. Hitler's belief that Americans were soft, weak, and guided by comfort was a fatal miscalculation. America was not only capable of war, America was built for war in a way Germany could never match. The final months were not a struggle for victory. They were a struggle for survival. The machine had won. The system had won, and the Germans had finally realized the full truth. America was built different. The psychological shock and aftermath. By early 1945, the reality was clear. Germany was no longer fighting just an army, but an unstoppable force. The scale of America's industrial power was unprecedented, and it was evident that the tide of the war had decisively turned. With the U.S. military machine relentlessly advancing, the German soldiers and civilians found themselves confronting an enemy they couldn't match, neither in resources nor in sheer numbers. The Germans had long prided themselves on military ingenuity, their elite units, tactical brilliance, and advanced weaponry. But the Americans brought to the battlefield something far more overwhelming:
unmatched resources, logistics, and industrial might. The ability of the U.S. to produce, supply, and maintain a massive war effort was simply beyond anything Germany could counter. One captured German soldier expressed the shock of their predicament. "We never understood it fully. It wasn't that they were better soldiers. It was that they could outproduce us, outlast us, and keep coming." This realization was a psychological blow. Germany's defeat wasn't a failure of strategy or willpower. It was a crushing acknowledgement that America's system of war, based on continuous production and innovation, had overwhelmed the best military tactics and strategy that Germany could muster. The impact of this defeat was felt not only on the battlefield, but also in the hearts of German soldiers and civilians. They had been part of a war machine that relied on ingenuity and heroism, yet it was crushed by the raw power of American industry and logistics. It was a new kind of warfare, one where numbers, resources, and endurance prevailed over military genius and battlefield tactics. Psychological impact on Germany. For Germany, the aftermath of the war was not just about loss of territory, but the realization that they had been defeated by the overwhelming power of the American industrial complex. The war had not been won by better soldiers, but by a system that could outproduce, outsupply, and outlast any nation. This left an enduring psychological scar, a belief that Germany had been beaten by something beyond human control, something far larger than any individual battle. As Germany rebuilt after the war, the psychological toll of this defeat lingered. The Marshall Plan and America's support in Reconstruction served as stark reminders of the new world order that had been forged, one where military success was no longer about brilliance on the battlefield, but about sustaining power on an industrial scale. The German psyche would take years to recover from the humiliation of having been outpaced not just by an army, but by an entire way of life, one that harnessed the full potential of technology, logistics, and mass production. Conclusion: a new era in warfare. In the end, Germany's defeat was not just a military failure, it was a paradigm shift in how wars would be fought. The dominance of American industrial power over the battlefield marked the end of an era where individual brilliance and tactical genius could ensure victory. Instead, it ushered in a new age where resources, logistics, and technological innovation were the true decisive factors. For Germany, the war wasn't just about losing. It was about comprehending how their own military might had been surpassed by a system they couldn't even fathom. America's victory wasn't just about conquering territory, it was about conquering the future. Final reflection. The psychological and ideological transformation in post-war Germany was profound. The war had reshaped not only nations, but the very nature of conflict itself. As the world rebuilt, one thing became clear. The war of the future would be fought with more than just soldiers. It would be fought with systems, logistics, and the relentless power of industry.